Welcome to my channel. This video will cover strategic situation in the Russo-Ukrainian war as of 8th March 2022, 13th day of war. First, let's have a look at the losses of the Russian forces during the last 12 days of fighting. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the losses were as follows. Personnel, more than 12,000 people. Tanks, 303 units. Armored combat vehicles, 1036 units. Artillery systems, 120 units. Element reactive system volley, 56 units. Air defense systems, 27 units. Planes, 48 units. Helicopters, 80 units. Automotive equipment, 474 units. Ships, boats, 3 units. Fuel tanks, 60 units. Unmanned aerial vehicle operational and tactical level, 7 units. The data are being updated. The calculation is complicated by the high intensity of operations. As you can imagine, Russian side does not confirm these losses, and it does not provide any information on the losses of the Ukrainian side. Ukrainian side also doesn't publish its losses. Now let's move to overview the fronts of the war. The Ukrainian army stopped the offensive of Russian troops in all directions. However, the situation remains tense. The enemy continues fierce fighting to achieve new breakthroughs, conducts massive bombardments of the cities and villages of Ukraine to intimidate civilians and force them to stop the resistance. The Russian command shifts the direction of the main strikes to Donbas. The battle is culminating and the struggle for strategic initiative is underway, and Ukraine's opportunities are growing. The situation west of Kyiv remains tense. A group of Russian troops continues to try to capture Kyiv and is trying to cut off communications in the capital. Makariv remains under the control of Ukrainian troops, however, there is heavy fighting going on in the city. The enemy is fighting in Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, Vorzel, and the surrounding area. The Russians went to Zhytomyr highway, threatening Fastov. The Ukrainian army is currently unable to quickly crush such large forces, but is actively reducing their numbers. The enemy is trying to expand their bridgehead. At the same time, the enemy is trying to break through from the east through Brovary. The situation remains tense. Fierce fighting continues. Situation near Kharkiv. The Russians are afraid to approach the city. There is no threat to Kharkiv on land. Russian aircraft continues large-scale artillery and airstrikes to restrain the city's garrison. On 7th of March, Ukrainian troops liberated Chuguyev near Kharkiv and confidently controlled situation around the city. On March 7th, Russian troops from Balaklia region attacked Izium, and the city suffered massive air and artillery strikes. The enemy occupied the southern part of the city. Ukrainian troops retreated to the north, blew up bridges, and deployed a new line of defense. However, Russians are carrying out attacks to drive Ukrainians out of Izium completely and then lead the crossings. Tense battles are taking place in Izium. This is the gateway to Donbas, and it remains partially under Ukrainian control. There will be no breakthrough here, however the defense of the city needs utmost Ukrainian attention. Donbas. During March 6th and 7th, Russian troops carried out numerous attacks on the front of the operation of Allied forces. The attacks were carried out in the districts of Severodonetsk, Zolote, Popasna, Troitske, Volnovakha. All attacks were repulsed with very large losses of the Russian forces. Statements by the Russian forces about the capture of Popasna were a fake. The purpose of the attacks is to distract, restrain the forces of the Ukrainian army, and to prevent maneuvers and the transfer of the troops to other directions. Volnovakha. Russians are trying to drive Ukrainian troops away from Mariupol, so they are fighting close battles in Volnovakha and trying to cut off Ukrainian group in the area. Volnovakha is currently of great operational importance, but despite all reports in the Russian media, Volnovakha remains largely under Ukrainian control, and the defenders keep the defense. All attacks are repulsed. However, the situation needs serious attention from the Ukrainian forces. Zaporizhzhia region. In this region, Russian main attack is focused on the region between Gholaypole and Polohi. They are trying to unite with the Izum forces to effectively cut off Ukrainian forces defending Mariupol. So far, the Russian forces were stopped in this region with heavy fighting. However, situation requires significant attention from the Ukrainian strategic command. Mariupol continues to fight heroically, being surrounded for 8 days already. The city's water supply, electricity and heat were completely destroyed. Corpses lie on the streets and in the apartments. The number of killed civilians and children is already in the hundreds. The hospital and intensive care units were destroyed by direct hits of Russian artillery and aircraft. There is no place to attend seriously wounded currently. Russians are not letting people out of the city so that they continue to consume food, water, and reduce supplies for the city defenders. The enemy conducts continuous reconnaissance from the air and strikes at any target. This is genocide in the purest form. However, Ukrainian soldiers are holding strong in the most difficult conditions and inflict powerful blows on the assault group, even in this situation. Mariupol, with its excellent resistance, allows Ukraine to control the corridor to Crimea from the Russian Federation and distracts a large group of Russian armed forces. The situation in Mariupol is the most serious on the whole front. Chernihiv. Fierce fighting is going on around the city. Russian troops are trying to completely surround the city, and Ukrainian troops do not just wait in defense but counterattack at the slightest opportunity. The Russian troops are avenging their defeats by bombing the residential areas. Sumy and Ochtyrka. Russian troops are trying to completely surround Sumy. The Russian forces have suffered heavy losses in the city area and therefore continued their terrorist bombings. They have blocked all passages from the city. The popular uprising in the occupied territories of the southern Ukraine continues to have colossal political and informational effect. It is not the people's fault that they were not given weapons and that the Ukrainian state did not deploy a reliable defense here. People still boldly come out with Ukrainian flags and create demonstrations that are broadcasted all over the world. Such demonstrations in the south are also an important front of the Ukraine's war. It shows clearly to the Ukrainian people, Russian people, and all over the world that people in the temporarily occupied territories will not have the occupation and they will fight with whatever they can. Conclusions. Ukraine has managed to mobilize sufficient forces to block the directions of attack by Russian troops. The turning point in the war depends on the ability of the armed forces of Ukraine to counteract the advancing Russian columns and to bind the enemy with active offensive operations in all directions. The Russians are superior in technology and armaments, they dominate in the air, but the Ukrainians are superior in numbers and motivation. Second, the Russian army has started a total war. Bombers are bombing residential areas, buildings are being destroyed by artillery and tanks, Shootings and killings of civilians are massive. The enemy is destroying the cities and the economy of Ukraine in order to force people to leave their homes and thus weaken their resistance. The Russian command understands that the whole nation has risen to the fight, and for the Russians now any Ukrainian is an enemy who poses danger. Third, the main efforts of the enemy are now focused on the Donbas and the south. Russian troops are trying to cut off Donbas from Ukraine along the borders of Kharkiv and Zaporozhye regions, as well as storming the besieged Mariupol. Fourth, the threat to Kyiv is great, but there will be no assault on the capital. The number of defenders of the capital exceeds the number of units of the Russian armed forces. Therefore, the enemy concentrated all its reserves to surround the capital on all sides. The pressure on Fasty will continue, because the Russians must keep up the pressure on Kyiv and not allow the Ukrainians to transfer their forces from here. Fifth, the Russian army has not yet exhausted all its reserves and regroups in an effort to pursue more limited strategic objectives. The operational pause is associated with heavy losses and fatigue of Russian troops, but does not mean that they are going to stop offensive operations. Taking advantage of mobility, Russians are trying to restrain Ukrainian forces by simultaneously advancing in all directions. On the other hand, the Russian army suffers critically from stretched communications, and is forced due to the weather to conduct an offensive only along the roads. The use of enemy's weaknesses depends on the mastery of Ukrainian command, the quality of logistics, armaments and operational reserves. It is impossible to defeat Russian columns without offensive operations. At the same time, stopping the Russian offensive and increasing resistance in all directions means that the strategic situation is generally changing in Ukraine's favor. With each day of mobilization, the effectiveness of resistance increases.